Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. As you can see by the thumbnail, we are testing and looking at the Yucca palette from Natasha Denona. It comes in 15 shades with different finishes like foils, some mattes, a cream to powder, and it's in a green color story. It is available on Sephora, Natasha Denona's site, and it is also available at Ulta Beauty, which is where I purchased mine from. $69 for this palette. It's a pretty steep and hefty price point, but you can actually pop out the shades here if you want to downsize and take some shades with you. All of the Natasha Denona palettes actually allow you to do that. So let's get into a tutorial of how I got this eyeshadow, and then I will show you guys some palette comparisons and see if you really need the Natasha Denona Yucca palette if you have some of these other palettes in your collection. So let's take a look at the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. I'm going to take off the little plastic. Obviously, I already have my foundation on. Today I used the Super Serum from Makeup Revolution with some other products. I will link it in the description box down below for y'all so you can take a look at that. We're going to do an eyeshadow look with the Yucca palette. Here are my thoughts and opinions on this one. As always, we're going to be using my Singe Beauty brushes, and Angie will be back from vacation June 21st, so you can actually purchase these then. I haven't swatched this palette yet, so I don't know exactly how the colors look on my skin. I do like that it is a grungy green look, and I am so excited to just dip into this. I'm going to be using the EO3 from Singe Beauty, and we're going to use Acacia, which is, this is like it reminds me of like peas from baby food. Like that's what it reminds me of. I'm just going to make sure my lids are pretty much tapped out. And again, using the Singe EO3, this is just like the best overall crease blending brush that you could oh, it's just so good. And I was like, if we're going to be using bougie shadows today, we're going to use my amazing Singe Beauty brushes, but I literally use these like every single day. Traditional Natasha Denona formula, that one's just matte and it blended out really nicely. I'm going to take the EO5 from Singe Beauty. This is like a really small in the crease on the outer corner. I love this brush just for like really getting into detail. And there is actually a cream to powder formula, which is this one right here. It's called Calathea, and this is cream to powder. So I want to use my Singe EO5 to see like how it picks up. I've used one. I have used one Natasha Denona cream to powder formula before, and it is like a really dark blue color in the Jubilee palette. It's a 5-pan. Don't like it. I never liked it at all. So we're going to use my EO5. See how the Natasha Denona cream to powder really packs a punch on my eye. And I'm thinking I'm going to use one of these shimmer shades on top of the dark green. So I'm just going to plant this all over the lid. Because I mean, why not? Let's just try something out of the box for me. Usually I don't go super dark with my eyeshadow, but I'm feeling it today. And Singe is just, the Singe Beauty brushes are able to get into the little creases and crevasses that I have on my eyes. So the fact that this cream shadow is applying so beautifully with this brush just makes me so happy because it's actually not having any problems in my crevasses. Okay, so with that brush, it applied so nicely, and it even went into my crevasses that I get on the inner corner of my eye. And I'm just going to use this shade right on the end here. It's called Plantasia, and this looks like a duochrome from a yellow to a pink shift. Super pretty, and we're going to put this just on the center of the lid, and it should hopefully pop a little bit because of that dark green shade. That is so pretty. That's gorgeous. I'm going to take my Singe EO2. This I'm going to use Willow, which is this like green, dark green, almost teal shade, and we're going to darken up the outer corner. Just the outer corner, because I have plans for the inner corner, but this brush is like perfect for outer corner and then also kind of like blending your crease line right here. Seeing just a little bit of fallout from that shimmer shade. Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna take my EO4. This is the one that I love to use for my under eyes. And we're using, again, Willow and applying this to the lower lash line. This is what my eyeshadow is looking like right now. We're going to use Camu, which is this shade right here. It's a very vibrant neon green. I want to put this in the inner corner because I feel like that's a Angie thing to do. We're using the EO1 from Singe Beauty, and I love this brush because it does really just like, it's a perfect inner corner brush, I think. Like, it's just the way it was made. It's pointed. It goes perfectly in my inner corner. It packs on shimmers well. It packs on mattes well. It's just such a gorgeous brush. I'm bringing it down into the lower lash line just to kind of blend these two shades together. I'm going to spray my face before I put on my mascara. This is the Milani Make It Last 16-hour wear. I actually just got the SPF one. I'm really excited to try that one. I'm going to put on my mascara and then I will be right back. Okay, so here is my first ever look with the Yucca palette from Natasha Denona. Very simple, easy eyeshadow look. And I really like how the cream to powder formulation, like it blended out so beautifully, and it was actually really easy to blend out. Like I said, some of the other ones that I've tried, they just have not been good, like at all. And they were obviously from Natasha, but this one just seemed to blend out a lot better. Maybe it's the brush, maybe it's the prep, I don't know. But the cream to powder did work a lot better. I do like I mean, it's the same consistent Natasha Denona formula. So, I mean, great pigmentation, blendability, super easy to use. And, you know, even though we only used one of the shimmer shades so far, I can't wait to test out some more looks. So stay tuned for 3 looks, 1 palette with this. Now let's get into some of the comparisons of the Yucca palette versus some other palettes that were just released on the market. All right, so now that you guys have seen my first like eyeshadow tutorial with the Yucca palette, it's a different day and we are finishing off this review. I'm actually doing a 3 looks 1 palette, so stay tuned for that video on my channel. Subscribe so you guys can get notified when I put that up. But so, do you need the Yucca palette? I've actually been using this eyeshadow palette for a couple of days, so like we're like fast forwarding into the future of this video, and I have been using this palette for the past few days. And I do have to say, this is like another grungy green neutral leaning palette. It is really fun to play with, and I have really enjoyed using this shade right here, which is Camu, and like popping this like on the outer corner, or that like I've really enjoyed putting it like on the inner corner and really just making it pop. One thing I've realized though is that it doesn't really last a long time. It tends to fade throughout the day. So that's something that I have noticed specifically with that shade. And then also with this shade right here, it just seems really hard to blend out. It's almost like waxy feeling, and it's really hard for me to pack on the color and put it on my lid, or even just use it in the lower lash line like what I did with this eye look today. But would you have known I put this on my lower lash line? Not really, because it packs no immediate punch. Other than that though, the foil shades are absolutely stunning in this palette. I mean, Natasha Denona delivers such a great foil formula. I really love Plantasia, which is this like duochrome shade right here. This is absolutely stunning and it's beautiful. Just like you could put this all over the lid. Just a really easy crease color. Be done for the day. If you want some grungier looks, use some of the greens in there. If you want a poppy look, use Camu. So this is a really fun palette to play with. As far as like Is it one of a kind? The answer to that is no. And I want to show you guys some comparison palettes. I'm actually going to be putting up like a full swatch video, but I'm just going to do side-by-sides for you to take a look at first, and then stay tuned for a full swatch video with the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. Let's take a look at some comparison palettes and see how the Yucca stands up to some newer palettes and some older palettes that you may already have in your collection. So the first comparison that I wanted to pull out was the Stone and Rock palette from Odin's Eye. This released around the same time as the Yucca palette. It does have a green color story in it. It has some of those more like army green shades. It also has the more tan brown shades in here. It does have that turquoisey blue shade. So it is pretty comparable. Now, when it actually applies on its eye, it's not as grungy, I have found, but when you guys see the whole swatch comparisons video, I will match up shade for shade to see if it really compares. But from a first glance look, you might be able to get some similar eyeshadow looks between Stone and Rock and the Yucca palette. The second comparison that I wanted to pull out was between the Anastasia Beverly Hills Nouveau palette and the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. The Anastasia Beverly Hills palette was released in 2022, so it's relatively new, and it came like mid-year of 2022. You can see it does have some similar shades. The reason why I really pulled it out was because of the grungier green tones in here, the salmony colors, and also some of the foil shades look relatively similar. From a glance, they don't look exactly the same. And this one does have a pop of purple, whereas this one has more of that neon-y green shade. But they kind of have like the same color story family feel, not necessarily would they be the same palette or the same looks. Then another palette that came to mind when I was looking at the Yucca palette was the Odin's Eye Hella palette. This was the collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. This came out in, I believe, 2022. And this is a very grungy green eyeshadow palette. The thing that was really reminiscent with me was the darker brown shade to brown, some of the yellowy green shades, the army green shades. Obviously, this is not a like 100% dupe for dupe either, but could you get some similar looks out of it? Quite possibly with the green shades. Now, the pinks kind of throw it off, so like if you took this out, they are pretty comparable shade-wise. Camu. The only one that's really comparable would be Rebirth up here, and that's more of like a yellow, whereas Camu is more of a green undertone. Both are super bright though. So could you get some similar looks? I really think you could. So I also wanted to pull out this Juvia's Place palette. It's the Nomad by Juvia's. And while this is only a 9-shade eyeshadow palette, it does have a lot of similarities between the Yucca palette. I mean, it's missing like your brighter green shade. It's missing, you know, this darker, you know, foresty green, almost like turquoisey green shade. But it does have a very similar feel to it. And you could get some similar looks with it. Not all, but Juvia's Place has a great formula, super blendable. I would say it's more than comparable to Natasha Denona at a super affordable price. You can find the No Bad palette still on Juvia's Place's website. You can also find it on Ulta Beauty. So this is available if you want like an alternative for the Yucca palette. So as I was going through my collection of eyeshadow palettes, I stumbled upon the Ivy palette from Sigma Beauty. This is also a 9-shade eyeshadow palette, and at first glance I thought it would be something super similar, but I'm kind of realizing now that the Sigma palette is very neutral leaning with like a couple pops of green, whereas the Natasha Denona is like 100% green leaning altogether. So this one probably not the best comparison. Okay, so let's pull out one of the Natasha Denona minis. This is the Mini Metropolis palette. It was actually a holiday palette that was released in either 2022 or 2021. And I grabbed this one because I loved the pop of green shimmer in the middle here. Just absolutely loved it. And while looking at this palette compared to the Natasha Denona palette, I did realize there were some similarities. It's almost like the Yucca palette is a larger version of this palette. Here we have it. Been saving the best one for last, the best comparison of all. When I saw the Yucca palette, I was like, that is the Croc palette from Clarity Cosmetics. Clarity Cosmetics Croc palette came out in early 2022, I believe, and this was my grungy green go-to eyeshadow palette. It is 10 shades in 36mm pans. It has a couple of duochromes in here, some flakier formulas as well, and it really compares to the Yucca palette on so many levels. Currently, the Croc palette is sold out on Clarity's website, but it does retail for $38 for 10 shades. And it's quite possible that the price will be a little bit different when they relaunch because the pan sizes will be a lot smaller. Okay, so there are some comparison palettes for you to take a look at. Some really similar palettes, some palettes that can kind of give you that look, but it'll give you an idea of like what would work and what wouldn't work for, if you do you need the Yucca palette? Looking at all these comparisons, not really. The thing about the Yucca palette is that while it is something that has been kind of thought of through different brands and different versions of this color story, this does offer 15 shades, whereas a lot of these other variations, they don't offer the 15 shades. So this is 100% dedicated to an all grungy green eyeshadow look. And you can do some like neutral, almost cool, glitzy, glammy, leaning eyeshadow looks as well. The one that is most comparable to all of these would have to be the Croc palette from Clarity Cosmetics. I think that one is hands down, like, this is the dupe for the Yucca palette, and this actually came out before the Yucca palette. So stay tuned for my full swatch video so that you guys can see how each shade in each of these palettes and how I pick them for matching or as closely matching as possible the shades in the Yucca palette. I'm not including them in this video only because I know that that's a lot of information and it'll be easier to kind of split it into a different video so you guys can just see the swatch comparisons from that. So guys, thank you so much for watching this review, this first impression of the Yucca palette. Stay tuned for 3 looks 1 palette and also a swatch comparison video that is coming to my channel very, very soon. I hope you guys consider subscribing so you can see all those, and I hope I get to see you in my next video. Bye.